Hi, I'm Susan from Worldpeacefull, and this is part of my bullying series. This will be part 12, and I'm going to discuss and frame within the bullying toolkit what is a toxic culture. But first, I thought I might discuss my own experience, having worked in 400 companies myself over a period of probably 12 years. My experience as working in the lower levels, I did a lot of contract work prior to my degree in economics and during my degree, and some of it afterwards. Now, what was really great was that I had insights prior to being educated and insights after being educated, where I started to really look at the human resource dynamics within an organisation and its structure. Now, of the 400 companies, I'll just mention sort of a handful that I recall working in because it was over a long period of time. I've also worked in a very wide range of positions, so I've really been able to explore the reality for employees. So some of the organisations I worked for were banks. I've worked for insurance companies. I've worked for doctors. I've worked for lawyers. I even worked for a special unit in the police where police were investigating police, and I was transcribing what police were saying about police during interrogation. I've worked on a submarine base, and I was the only female, and there was 1,000 male employees. And you can just imagine it humorously, myself clip-clopping, through the hangar, clip-clop, clip-clop, 1,000 eyes turned. And what was a bit disturbing about that particular assignment was where I was working, they had naked women up on the walls. So to be honest, from a sexual harassment point of view, that could have been problematic for me, given that women were seen in such a light. They weren't seen as colleagues, they were seen as sexual objects. and how many women have felt that? Many. We haven't really been seen for who we are. But I'll talk a bit about that as part of toxic cultures, actually. I've worked in so many places. I've worked for a satellite children's channel. So this was over in London. I've worked for education organisations where they were branding brand names onto, papers that children, were doing tests on, so that the kids kept seeing the brand images. That was very concerning, actually, where corporate influence was entering childhood. But we've seen that with a lot of multinational corporates where they're branding specifically for children. And of course, the idea is to embed that brand so that the child will be loyal to it for the whole of their life. But there's also ethical questions as to the child can't really make real choices when they're young. They just see that as another brand, something that's in their environment. They don't know that there's an agenda behind that brand, which is to get them to purchase things for the rest of their lives. So there are ethical issues, and possibly emerging out of more toxic environments, these ethical issues are discarded because those in either management or as part of that particular culture don't regard ethics highly. They see it more as an impediment to productivity. So in my experience, I've worked with a lot of people. I've worked with, singularly men in certain organisations like foundries, manufacturing areas. I've worked in unions as well. I've also worked for management consultants, independently and within organisational structures. I've worked for architects. A whole range, just about every industry I've worked in, actually. When I cast my mind back over many, many years, I can remember in one job, they were filming a segment for a television program into RSI, and they were actually looking at how we were all sitting, and I was the one who was sitting with the worst posture. I didn't get to see the film, unfortunately, but they did zoom in on me. I was obviously hunched over, and the whole idea with ergonomics is to keep the body in a really an L shape, I used to put my keyboard on my lap. I can type from there. I'm very fast. I also have typed. Um, I was I was engaged to take down word for word everything everybody said in a tendering process. It was quite fascinating, and it was for education. And the tenderer was trying to pitch, if you like, for IT technology going into organising. I'm just trying to work out how to explain this. Imagine the child at the centre, as this program was relational. So you have all these little nodules of child's friends, occupation, and this is profiling per child. So this IT company was seeking to bring that into education so that educators, teachers, administrators, managers could profile children, get an idea of their interests. You know, it's quite an interesting um, idea, and it has lots of ethical ramifications in terms of privacy and profiling. But my job in that particular forum was to take down word for word everything that was said. You can imagine how fast. I have to be very, very still within myself in order to capture every word that's spoken and type it and try not to make mistakes. You have to be like a robot. And I can't say I was 100% perfect, but I got down a lot. I usually am pretty good at taking notes, and I'm very good at observation. Those are two strengths of mine. I'm also very good at adaptability. I can adapt to any environment. When you're in the lower levels too, in this particular case, you have to do whatever is told of you, and this is very interesting from the perspective of stress. They say that people on keyboards, secretarial, were experiencing higher stress than air traffic controllers. What's fascinating from my perspective, having been trained as an economist and a market analyst for many, many years, I've also been working with entrepreneurs. I've worked with consultants to industry. I've been involved in training of middle level management. So I've come from a very wide range of perspectives. As a market analyst, of course, I've very much looked into management strategy to assist organisations in really understanding their markets and so forth. But coming back down to the grassroots level within organisations, I've had a really good look. And I've seen the unhappiness, firstly, of many staff members, because management are not going to be shown by staff what they really think. There is no way they're going to let you know that they're not happy. Now, this was something I thought to say, actually. I remember Rupert Murdoch in the Leveson inquiry, and I always remember him saying, "No one ever told me they were dissatisfied." And I laughed. Of course, they're not going to tell him they're dissatisfied because they're concerned about getting the sack. And this is because within management structures, they're hierarchical, they're dictatorial largely, in that, you know, unless they become more inclusive in their management approach, there are still many organisations that are not consulting their staff, or they give the premise or the illusion of consultation, but they're actually not really that interested in what the staff think. Now, this is why staff don't inform management of the reality on the floor, because they're concerned about being seen as critical. They don't want to get sacked because their mortgage is on the line. They have to consider that. They cannot put themselves in a position where they could lose their job because they may have families depending on them. We're in such a society where there's so many costs, and there's also ostracism if you're unemployed. That's a big one. That's been deliberately crafted too, so that it's not attractive for people to be unemployed. So it's cultivated in the sense of dole bludgers. You know, if you're out of the workforce, you lose your friends. They see you as no longer economically viable. You're seen in conscious and subconscious ways as a loser. So this is a huge disincentive to find yourself unemployed. So people will try their best to retain their jobs. There's also the carrot that's placed in front of people to continue to improve, to continue training. There's great pressures on continuous development, you know, of skills, to be keeping up with change. If you're in the IT industry, you'd be having to upskill constantly. So there's enormous pressures. Every industry is different. In banking, we're seeing the actual diminishment of branches. So there have been huge staff cuts as technology is replacing staff. I was in the workforce, over a 20-year period. So I've actually seen workplaces change from, pretty relaxed spaces, like in the public service. I've worked in the public sector, where the tea lady comes around and we all sit down for 20-minute tea breaks and afternoon breaks. It's all very relaxed. There wasn't as much pressure back then. Work was not seen as so intense as it is now. The competition around work is intensified in the present day. And that's because of global changes to the global market, where we've seen the Asian tigers were new entrants. Back in the 80s and 90s, they were incredibly productive. They had high levels of technology, given the Marshall Plan that was implemented after the Second World War in Japan. They had islands of automation, so they were very much leaders in the manufacturing industry. That was actually brought in by Americans, under the Marshall Plan. Just trying to remember now, back to economics. There were some real prime movers back then who brought in new manufacturing techniques. And then, of course, that spread to South Korea. We've seen Singapore emerging. Just trying to think. China, of course, is later it emerged more and more powerfully as China started to, in a sense, democratize. It hasn't fully democratized. It had zones, economic zones. Hong Kong, of course, when it was taken back by China, was a democratic island state country under British rule just prior. So China was able to absorb in those commercial practices, and they saw, obviously, that by adopting the commercial attitudes, they could compete better globally. They have a population, I think it's 1.6 billion from memory. There was a movement from the agrarian, lifestyle to the cities. So massive changes within China. They actually built cities that hadn't even been lived in, as they're exploring moving from a communist state to sort of semi-socialist, and then moving more towards capitalist zones. And of course, Russia, perestroika, as it started to move away from 100% communism and socialism. They started to bring in, I remember when I was over in Moscow, I can remember seeing the old classic Coca-Cola brands. McDonald's was there. You could see the old brands actually being sold in these marketplaces. India opened up after many years of protectionism. Thailand's another form of cheap labour now. Laos to a very more of a minor source of cheaper labour. But the Asian story, they were obviously seeking to industrialise. So they've all moved from, some of them from states of great poverty. They have a memory of poverty. And we certainly do too. Even in my grandmother's generation, people were, during the war on food stamps, they've known limitation. It's only really been the last generation that we've had rampant consumerism. This younger generation and probably the generation before have really experienced, through the lofty 60s and 70s, and then we had declines with the oil shocks. So I'm bringing in the economic global issues because this has impacted on workplaces as the world has become much more competitive. We've also seen South America becoming more and more competitive. I've travelled there and seen capitalism moving in from the United States into Mexico, Central and South America. It's been very interesting seeing the changes, and you can see the corporate brand images in a lot of third world and second world countries where they're following the lead of market capitalism. as they can see the wealth that's been produced, and of course the access to credit, which has fueled dynamic growth around the world. But with that, what we're seeing in the current age is global contraction. So what we typically say in marketing is that products reach, they go through a growth period, then they optimize out. So this is the maximum price level that you'll have it, and then they start to decline, and price will fall as volume increases, as they try and extract as much value out of that market. We've also seen, obviously, marketing go through its various phases, where initially it was really just, learning how to sell, like sales became the way of moving products. But as, again, more competition came through the pipeline and we saw more product entries, more innovation, more market wafers, we started to see more sophisticated marketing where people were not so much selling on to people, but seeking out what people's needs and wants were. And so creating market segmentation on the basis of those needs. So those new products that have rapid increase because people are trying them, and then after a time there's maturation, they mature out, been around a while, people are used to them, and then they have to either keep reinventing or sort of supplementing that product to make it more attractive, to keep sales up before it goes into decline. And of course, all this impacts workplaces. The information technology age, which is the age we're in now, is another phase where technology is driving production. Our communications have accelerated massively. There was a point where we believed that the information society was actually going to create more leisure time, and there was huge cases put that as we had more labour-saving devices, we would have more time to relax and enjoy life. But what we've seen as a result of technology is a speeding up of the economies, the demands on labour or employees. I don't really like the term labour because it tends to dehumanise people. I don't like the term human resources either, and please forgive me for those human resource managers listening to this. I just don't personally agree with anything that dehumanises human beings. We are very much a driver in this process, and the whole purpose of economics was to bring happiness to people. That was the point of it. But what is increasingly happening is that people are serving the economic system, and this is a discussion that must happen in the business community. The employees are not here to make your profits. We are, as a collective, and this is not a left-wing statement, this is the purpose of economics, was to bring a better lifestyle to people, to ensure greater happiness. And this is why economics was accepted, was because people believed it would eventually bring them happiness. If they work really hard, at the end they can retire and they've got plenty of money, they've got a home that they own, and this is why economics was accepted. Now, if this changes, which it has, people are no longer going to support it over a period of time. Eventually they will be calling out for, and I would say today they are calling out for change, because what they're starting to realise is that they're working to pay off all these mortgages, but the mortgages are going up because we're getting speculative investors coming in. So as you can see, I've just covered a lot of complex territory in terms of workplaces. This is creating the context around modern day workplaces today. And I've brought in my own experience on all ends. Having been in management myself, I've managed a company for, certainly my own business, I've managed for 6 years, and a further 4 years, so probably a decade, I've managed my own, and another decade in roles associated with management, and another decade as an employee in 400 companies. So I've had a really broad ranging experience. So now I want to go to the bullying issue, which is really flushing out toxic cultures. Obviously, the healthy cultures are where we're having life-work balance, where people feel happy, where their relations with each other are proactive, they're included, they feel a sense of excitement in going to work, they feel that this work is really what they love. even if they don't particularly love it, it's a harmonious and balanced type organisation where management's very inclusive. That typically is what frames healthy organisations.